Before we begin, I want you to do something important. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, not just to stay informed, but because some stories are too vital to be buried. What you're about to witness isn't fiction. It's not a myth. It's history. Real, brutal, and almost unspeakable, but it needs to be spoken. This is the story of Sporus, a name lost in the ruins of ancient Rome. A boy torn apart by the most deranged obsession of one of history's most depraved emperors. What happened to him defies comprehension, and yet it happened, and we owe it to his memory, and to all the nameless others like him, to remember. Let's begin. He was only 14, a boy, not yet a man, raised with books, music, and the innocent certainty that life would unfold the way it did for any privileged Roman youth. He had dreams of inheriting his father's textile business, of building a home, of marrying the senator's daughter he was promised to. But Sporus wasn't just another boy. His face had the kind of beauty that stopped people mid-stride in the forum. Skin like marble, golden curls that caught sunlight like fire, and eyes that made poets put down their wine and pick up their pens. That beauty, once a blessing, would become a curse, a doorway to the darkest corners of human cruelty. The day Nero saw him was the day fate snapped in two. It was during Juvenalia, the emperor's self-indulgent festival of art and performance, where noble children sang, danced, and bowed for a tyrant's amusement. Sporus was chosen to act out a myth, Apollo mourning a lost love. He didn't know that Nero, watching from his ivory throne, saw not a boy playing a god, but the ghost of a woman he couldn't stop grieving. That night, imperial guards knocked on the Flavius family door with smiles carved in steel. They carried a message, dressed up as an invitation. The emperor wished to speak to the boy. No one refused Nero, not without consequences. Sporus's father offered bribes, begged, even dropped to his knees. The guards laughed. The next morning, Sporus walked into the imperial palace in his finest toga, his hands trembling slightly in the folds of silk. He thought it might be an opportunity. Naive, hopeful. Instead, he was led down corridors that felt colder with every step, until finally separated from his father without a word of explanation. It was the last time he would ever see the man who raised him, the last time he would ever be free. At first, it felt like a dream wrapped in gold. Luxurious rooms, exotic fruits, poets and philosophers brought to speak with him. Nero treated him with gentleness, so unnerving, it felt like seduction. He spoke of beauty, of rebirth, of second chances. Sporus, still clinging to boyhood illusions, began to think perhaps this wouldn't be so terrible. Perhaps the emperor simply wanted companionship. It was a lie. A beautifully constructed lie designed to soften him before the blade fell. On the 8th night, that blade arrived, not as a weapon but as a decision. Nero entered Sporus's chamber with doctors, assistants, and surgical tools. Calmly, almost lovingly, he explained. Sporus was to become his new Poppaea, the wife he had killed in a fit of rage months earlier. To do that, changes had to be made. Sporus, frozen in disbelief, tried to speak, but the guards had already moved into place. This was not a request. This was a command. The surgery was done with precision, with opium instead of mercy. He was conscious, aware enough to hear Nero's voice guiding the doctors. Not just removal, the emperor said, but reshaping. I want her whole again. They carved away his identity, cauterized his boyhood, and stitched an illusion in its place. For 3 hours, Sporus screamed, cried, and eventually went silent. When it was done, he no longer recognized the thing they had left lying on the marble table. The recovery was agony. Fever burned through him like a curse. In his delirium, he called out for his mother, begged his father to save him, but no one came. Nero did, daily, bringing gifts, whispering fantasies into the darkness. To the emperor, Sporus was no longer a boy. He was a vessel, a resurrection, a living shrine to the woman he had destroyed, and if reality didn't fit Nero's desires, he would bend it until it did. The days blurred into rituals of transformation. Sporus was dressed, painted, perfumed, not just as a woman, but as one woman, Poppaea. The stylists who once served the empress were summoned to train Sporus, how to walk like her, speak like her, smile like her, even sleep like her. Nero stood watching every lesson, correcting details with the devotion of a man sculpting a god. Sporus tried, failed, cried, but tears were not allowed. There was only obedience. The boy was fading piece by piece. Soon he was no longer referred to as Sporus in the palace. He became Poppaea, and to deny that name was treason. Servants bowed. Senators addressed him with reverence or died. Nero had rewritten reality and demanded that the world read from his script. Sporus wore dresses stitched from silk finer than breath, jewels heavy enough to bruise, and smiled on command. But inside, he was disappearing. The edges of who he had been were fraying fast. Then came the wedding, a grotesque parody of the imperial ceremony held years before. Nero spared no expense. The same flowers, the same songs, the same dress, remade in exacting detail, sewn by trembling hands who knew that one crooked stitch could mean death. 500 guests gathered, some openly wept, not for joy, but because they understood the horror they were being forced to witness. None dared object. Sporus stood at the emperor's side, his body altered, his spirit buried beneath layers of silk and fear. Nero kissed him and whispered, "You've come back to me." When Sporus flinched, Nero dug his nails into the boy's skin beneath the veil, smiling wide for the crowd. The performance was complete. The illusion was law. And Sporus, once a boy with dreams, was now a puppet in a madman's fantasy. After the wedding came the honeymoon, weeks in a secluded villa where Nero indulged every twisted desire. Sporus, now entirely broken, responded mechanically. He laughed when told to laugh, cried when expected to cry. Sometimes he forgot his own name. Sometimes he believed the lie. Nero called it love, but it was worship twisted into torment, a resurrection by force, soaked in blood and delusion. The palace mirrors were replaced with distorted glass, making Sporus look softer, more feminine. Artists painted portraits where the boy's features slowly morphed into Poppaea's. The past was rewritten with every brushstroke. The more Sporus tried to remember who he had been, the more the world around him insisted he was someone else. Reality became a cage, one he no longer had the strength to fight. And so he faded. The voice changed. The muscles withered. His face became a mask, his soul a whisper. Nero had not just destroyed Sporus's body. He had annihilated his self. In private, Sporus wept. In public, he smiled. And no one, not one soul in Rome, dared to speak the truth aloud. As weeks turned into months, the torment shifted from physical to psychological warfare. Nero didn't simply want a replica of Poppaea. He wanted her memories, her thoughts, her instincts. Sporus was forced to reenact moments he had never lived. Dinners Poppaea once hosted, dances she performed, the way she spoke when she was happy, the way she slept when she was sad. Servants were ordered to recount every detail they remembered, and Sporus had to embody them, scene by scene, night after night. If he faltered, Nero would lash out, not with fists, but with soft, seething disappointment, worse than pain, because it twisted guilt into submission. Soon, Sporus began to lose time. Blackouts, fragments of days where he couldn't recall who he had spoken to, what he had worn, or how he had acted. His voice, now higher and softened by the lack of testosterone, no longer sounded like his own. The mirror, what little of it was left, reflected someone he didn't recognize. When he looked at himself, he no longer saw the boy from Rome's hills, the merchant's son with ambition in his veins. He saw a stranger shaped in the image of obsession. He began to wonder if maybe Nero was right. Maybe this was who he had become. He tried to die, 3 times. First with linen sheets twisted into a noose, then by leaping toward an open window, and finally with a stolen blade slipped from the dinner table. Each time, he was stopped. Nero responded not with anger, but with a chilling tenderness, like a god disappointed in his creation. More guards were posted. Everything sharp or heavy was removed. Sporus's world became padded silence, velvet-draped cages, and whispering priests murmuring prayers for a soul that didn't belong to him. Nero brought in exorcists next. He claimed Poppaea's spirit was being blocked by a demon, Sporus's original self. So they whipped him, starved him, forced him to drink bitter elixirs that made him hallucinate. When he screamed for his father, they said it was the devil resisting resurrection. And through it all, Nero wept with joy. He believed he was saving his wife's soul. Every tear he shed was gasoline on the fire of madness, and Sporus was the match. The climax of Nero's delusion came when he decided Poppaea must return not only as wife, but as mother. He ordered physicians to simulate pregnancy. Sporus was dressed in specially padded garments, his schedule dictated by the imagined stages of gestation. He was coached to behave like an expectant mother, sick in the mornings, tender in the evenings, emotional, vulnerable. Nero watched every moment like a man watching a miracle. To him, this was sacred. To Sporus, it was insanity wrapped in ritual. And then came the birth. A 12-hour theatrical nightmare. Real midwives, fake blood, and a doll passed through trembling hands while Sporus screamed on command. He had been trained for it. He was supposed to cry at the right time, to coo when the baby was placed in his arms. Nero clutched the doll like it was flesh and bone. He named it. He called Sporus Mother. And when Sporus broke down into sobs, not of joy, but of unbearable shame, Nero kissed his forehead and whispered, "She's back. She's whole." After that, there was no Sporus. Not truly. His mind had retreated so far into itself that even the guards began to speak of him in whispers. They said he talked to the doll like it was real. They said he rocked it in the moonlight and hummed lullabies in a voice that wasn't his. He had become exactly what Nero wanted, a living hallucination. And in that transformation, the last remnants of the boy who once walked through Rome were gone. But Nero wasn't finished. As Rome began to fracture, political enemies rising, rebellions forming, the emperor became more desperate, more paranoid. He decided that Poppaea needed sisters, so he began abducting other boys. Beautiful, fragile, terrified. Sporus was forced to train them, teach them how to walk, how to serve, how to survive. It wasn't mentoring. It was grooming, forged in fire. The boy who had once begged to die now taught others how to live inside the illusion. Because he knew the price of breaking character, he bore the scars. Rome crumbled around them. Armies defected. Senators whispered of assassination. But Nero clung to his fantasy like a drowning man to driftwood. And in that fantasy, Sporus remained the centerpiece. He was now tethered to the emperor with golden chains, literal ones, jewels laced into iron, fastened to his wrists and waist. Wherever Nero went, Sporus was dragged beside him. Senate chambers, military briefings, even public addresses. The boy was no longer a symbol of beauty. He was a symbol of madness, made flesh. Citizens stared, some wept, others turned their faces, but no one intervened. Power, when wrapped in silk and crowned with gold, has a way of silencing the soul. Nero paraded Sporus like a trophy, like proof that even death couldn't deny him what he wanted. Sporus, eyes empty, face painted, body scarred, moved like a ghost through marble halls and blood-soaked gardens. The world collapsed, and still the fantasy marched on. Then Nero began to crack. The paranoia mutated into rage. He accused Sporus of betrayal, said he wasn't Poppaea enough, that the demon had returned, that the spirit was corrupted. More rituals followed, more burnings, more screams. Sporus bore it all with mechanical compliance, like a machine learning how to survive a storm, until even the machine began to break. One night, as Rome's downfall grew inevitable, Nero and Sporus fled the city. They hid in a crumbling villa on the edge of the empire. It was supposed to be a sanctuary. It became a tomb. Nero oscillated between sobbing hysteria and violent lust. And Sporus, ever silent, waited. When Nero finally slept, Sporus found a knife. He tried to cut the chains, not to kill, but to escape. He wanted to run, just once, but the sound woke the emperor. And Nero, in his final descent, unleashed a punishment so savage, it shattered what was left. He burned Sporus with irons, screamed of demons, raved of betrayal, tore flesh from bone with his bare hands. When it was over, Sporus had lost fingers. His face was a map of blisters. His eyes, once praised in poetry, were nearly blind. And still, Nero whispered, "I love you." Still, he clung to the illusion. And in the end, when the army arrived, they found a corpse and a shadow. Nero, dead by his own hand. Sporus, tied to a tree, muttering nonsense to no one. He was Poppaea. He was the baby. He was himself. He was no one. They didn't know what to do with him. The soldiers who found Sporus were trained for war, not for the unraveling of a human soul. They unchained him, gave him water, tried to speak gently, but it was like reaching through smoke. He flinched at touch, cowered from voices. He spoke in fragments, sometimes as Papilla, sometimes as a crying child, sometimes just humming lullabies to the doll he no longer held. His body trembled from fever, his mind drifted like ash in the wind, and still, somehow, he breathed. A boy torn into pieces who hadn't yet died. General Galba, now declared emperor, was horrified, not just by what Sporus had endured, but by what he represented. He wasn't a person anymore in the eyes of the new regime. He was evidence of Nero's madness, of the rot at the core of Rome's power. Galba knew the people could not see this broken boy. His wounds would become questions. His voice would become outrage. And Rome, at that moment, needed forgetting more than remembering. So Sporus was hidden. They placed him in a villa far from the city. Not a prison, not a home. A place where silence lived. Doctors were assigned. Guards posted. No visitors, no press. Just a ghost with skin. He wandered the rooms like a shadow, occasionally pausing in doorways, as if listening for footsteps that no longer came. Sometimes he smiled at empty chairs. Sometimes he cried when the wind blew through the curtains. He was 19, but he had lived 1,000 years in hell. The doctors tried. They gave him medicines, spoke softly, played music, but they could not undo the carving of his soul. He reacted with terror to every male voice, panicked if someone touched him unexpectedly. He flinched at his reflection and once shattered a mirror with his bare hands. His mind had built walls inside walls, rooms locked behind doors that had no keys. He didn't recognize himself, and the world, mercifully, no longer demanded he perform. On rare days of lucidity, he would whisper pieces of his past, the name of his mother, the smell of linen in his father's shop, a poem he once loved. Then, just as quickly, he would slip back into the illusion, rocking a pillow as if it were a child, speaking to a man who wasn't there. His lips moved in dialogue only he could hear, and even in those moments, some part of him knew it wasn't real. But real had never been safe. He began to ask for death, not dramatically, not emotionally, but with a quiet, desperate resolve. "Let me go," he'd whisper. "Please." But death, like everything else, had been delayed. Until one night, when the guards outside his door nodded off and the doctors didn't check fast enough, he made his final escape. Strips of linen, a wooden beam, a silent decision. When they found him, his feet were off the ground, his fingers bloodied from the instinct to live, still battling the will to die. His body had surrendered, but not easily. The report was suppressed, his name wiped clean. No funeral, no pyre, no stone with his name. Rome, always skilled at rewriting memory, erased him from its records. But a few saw, a few remembered, a few wrote his name down in margins, between legends of emperors and conquests. They remembered the boy who was unmade by love, twisted into power. And those whispers carried forward, past centuries, past ruins, until now, when you heard his story. This is not just a tale of Nero's madness. It is a warning, a mirror held to every age where power consumes innocence and remakes it in its image. Sporus was not a myth. He was not a metaphor. He was a boy, with a future, with laughter, with dreams of building, not surviving. And what was done to him wasn't fate, it was choice. A choice by those in power to desecrate, dominate, and deny. And yet, through the ashes, there is something defiant in remembering him, in saying his name, in refusing the silence that swallowed him for centuries. Because when we remember Sporus, we name every other victim hidden in history, every soul twisted and thrown away by the machinery of unchecked control. This is not just Rome's story, it is humanity's story. If this story moved you, don't let it disappear again. Share it, speak about it, let it echo. Subscribe to this channel and activate notifications, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. These aren't just stories, they are memorials, carved in word, not stone, built to endure what empires forget. We carry his memory not because we can change what was done, but because we must change what comes next. Sporus's story is no longer hidden. You heard it, you felt it, and now you hold it. What you do with it matters. The silence was theirs. The voice is yours. Thank you for staying to the end. There are more truths buried in time. More names like his waiting to be remembered. Tell me in the comments, whose story do we uncover next? Which forgotten soul deserves to rise from the shadows? Because this is just the beginning. I'm Oliver, and I want to thank you for walking through this painful, powerful story with me. What we witnessed wasn't just history. It was a mirror to the darkness humanity is capable of, and a call to never let silence win. If this moved you, subscribe to the channel and stand for truth, because remembering the forgotten is how we fight the repetition of cruelty. Let's keep giving voice to the voiceless, one story at a time. Take care of your heart, and I'll see you in the next chapter.